Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving headfirst into a concept that, well, it sounds like simple math at first glance,
Right.
but it actually holds some really profound secrets for achieving more with less. We're talking about the 80-20 principle.
Mhm.
You might know it as the Pareto Principle, Pareto Law, maybe the principle of least effort.
Lots of names for it.
Exactly. So our mission today is to, uncover its surprising origins, show just how universal this pattern seems to be,
Yeah.
and then really dig into how understanding it can actually transform your approach to business, to your personal life, even some of the big societal challenges we face.
And that's spot on. This isn't just some, academic theory. It's a really systematic way of looking at the world, at its inherent imbalance.
Rebalance, okay.
Yeah, it reveals how, again and again, a small fraction of effort or resources or causes,
Hmm.
it often leads to the vast majority of the results.
Oh.
It's really about spotting these powerful patterns you might not otherwise notice.
Huh?
And once you see them, believe me, you start seeing them everywhere.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. Where did this powerful idea even come from?
Well, the core pattern itself was first really observed back in 1897 by an Italian economist, Vilfredo Pareto.
Pareto, okay.
And his initial discovery was pretty fascinating. He noticed this predictable lack of balance in how wealth was distributed.
Uh-huh.
Specifically, that roughly 80% of the wealth was owned by just 20% of the population. Now, Pareto, he went deep into the math, developed formulas.
Right.
But for us, the brilliance is more in the concept, not the equations. Because apparently he was actually very bad at explaining it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in a way that people could easily grasp. And that's probably why its practical significance kind of lay dormant for a generation.
That's fascinating. So it was there, but hidden. And what's really compelling is how this principle was then picked up and elaborated on by others, right? People
Right.
like Mr. Duran, Mr. Ziff, Krugman, even folks at IBM in the 60s.
That's right. Duran, for instance, he was huge in the global quality revolution. And it's quite ironic, actually. His theories, which really leaned heavily on this principle, find the vital few causes of defects and fix those.
Right.
They were initially just ignored in the U.S., but Japan, they jumped on it in 1953.
Wow.
Yeah. And it wasn't until after 1970 when Japanese industry really started becoming a threat to Western markets that Duran was finally taken seriously back home.
It just goes to show, doesn't it? Sometimes the biggest insights are right there, overlooked, until you just can't ignore them anymore.
And that's such a crucial point. This pattern isn't just about economics or, factory quality control.
Right.
We see these surprising examples like all over the place.
Mhm.
Everyday life, other fields. For instance, Sir Isaac Pitman, inventor of shorthand.
Oh, yeah.
He found that fewer than 1% of words, only about 700 common words, make up 80% of common speech.
Whoa, that's like an Eidenhoed-1 principle.
Exactly, a much more extreme version. And, wealth inequality is still a persistent example.
Mm-hmm.
Think about this. 1973 to 1995 in the U.S., all income gains went to the top 20% of earners.
All of it.
All of it. And get this, 64% of that total increase went to just the top 1%. It's mind-boggling.
Wow.
And today, around 5% of U.S. households own about 75% of household equity. Even the U.S. dollar's role globally fits the pattern.
How so?
Well, almost half of world trade is invoiced in dollars, right? But the U.S. only accounts for about 13% of world exports.
Yeah, so a big imbalance there, too.
A huge imbalance. The pattern of disproportionate outcomes is just pervasive.
Okay, so what does this all really mean for you listening? It means this isn't some, rigid 80-20 rule every single time.
No, absolutely not.
It's not always precisely 80-20, but it is always a predictable lack of balance, like that beer study you mentioned.
The beer study.
80% of the beer drunk by only 28% of the friends, an 80-28 relationship.
Exactly.
So the key takeaway here, the real insight, it's the imbalance itself, not the exact number.
Precisely. It's recognizing that not all inputs, not all efforts, not all causes are created equal. Some just matter way more than others.
Okay, let's shift gears then. How does this understanding apply to, say, the world of business?
Right. So there's this idea of the 80-20 theory of the firm, and it's quite different from classical economic theory.
How is that?
Well, classical theory often talks about equilibrium, right? A state of balance.
Yeah.
But the 80-20 theory is, well, it's verifiable, it's helpful, because it's characterized by continuous imbalance, not equilibrium.
Okay, imbalance again.
Always imbalance. So,
Yeah.
for example, small percentage of suppliers, They consistently get higher prices, bigger market shares.
Hmm.
And typically, 80% of the market is supplied by 20% or even fewer of the suppliers. And guess what? Those dominant players are usually way more profitable.
Stands to reason.
And it works inside a company, too. 80% of the surplus, the profit, usually comes from just 20% of the employees.
The star performers.
Exactly. And if you zoom in even more on an individual employee,
Hmm.
80% of their value is often created in just 20% of their time.
Wow.
Yeah, those moments when they're really operating in several times his or her normal level of effectiveness.
Peak performance time.
Right. And it highlights how apparently small differences create large consequences. The source material actually notes that a product that's only, say, 10% better in value,
Just 10%.
just 10%,
Yeah.
can lead to a 50% difference in sales and maybe even a 100% difference in profit.
That's incredible leverage from a small edge.
Massive outperformance from a minor edge. It compounds.
Okay, that's a really powerful point. So for you listening, this principle, it gives you a unique way to look at things, maybe even understand why your strategy might be wrong.
Yeah, it challenges things.
Applying 80/20, it seems like it often turns conventional wisdom upside down.
It really does.
Instead of just trying to, raise average efforts everywhere.
Spread thin.
Right. The insight is to shift your focus completely. It's about celebrating and, more importantly, replicating exceptional productivity.
Finding what works and doubling down.
Exactly. Identifying what really works and doing more of that. Seeking the shortcut, maybe. The most impactful path, not just, grinding through the whole exhaustive course.
Be selective, not exhaustive.
Yes. Strive for excellence in a few key things. Don't just aim for good in lots of things. And it also implies, delegating or outsourcing as much as possible.
Get stuff off your plate.
Yeah, and crucially, doing only what you are genuinely best at and actually enjoy most. That's a radical shift, isn't it? From just doing more to doing better strategically.
It is. And businesses can apply this in very concrete ways. A critical step is segmentation.
Segmentation.
Yeah, breaking down your business by product, by customer, by competitive segment, whatever makes sense, to find those critical few.
Got it.
Like, there's this example, Electronic Instruments, Inc. For them, 20% of their sales accounted for a massive 53% of their profits.
Whoa.
The insight, you absolutely cannot treat all sales equally. Some are just vastly more valuable.
Makes sense.
Or there's a consulting firm mentioned. Their old clients, they were just 26% of the business,
Okay.
but generated an incredible 84% of the profits. That's an 84-26 rule right there.
So focusing on those existing relationships pays off massively.
Huge leverage. Another big application is through simplicity.
Simplicity. How so?
Well, the insight here, and the source really stresses this, is that real scale and, frankly, beauty in business. It doesn't come from complex stuff. It comes from relentlessly simplifying.
Cutting the fat.
Finding and optimizing those vital few things that drive disproportionate value. There's a quote, "Big is only ugly and expensive because it is complex. Big can be beautiful, but it is simple that is always beautiful."
I like that. Simple is beautiful.
Exactly. There was a study of German companies, medium-sized ones. The only thing that really differentiated the winners, simplicity.
Really, just that.
Just that. They sold a narrower range of products to fewer customers and even had fewer suppliers. That focus just amplified their strengths.
Interesting. What about costs?
For cost reduction, the principle tells you, focus 80% of your effort on the 20% of your business with the biggest cost reduction potential.
Don't spread the effort thin.
Right. Pacific Dull, for example, found that a quarter of their work, 25%, was spent processing just 0.1% of payments.
Tiny fraction, huge effort.
Massive waste.
Yeah.
So the insight is, don't just slash costs everywhere. Find the specific areas of huge waste and target those.
Smart.
And industries have caught on. Supermarkets, IKEA, self-service,
Right.
discount chains. They strategically stock only the 20% of products that drive 80% of the sales.
The fast movers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Interface, the carpet company, they totally changed their model, started leasing carpet tiles, simplified everything, cut costs for everyone.
They found the core value and built a simpler model.
Precisely.
It's really clear how this transforms strategy. But, okay, what about for you personally? Your career, your finances? Let's start with, say, marketing and sales.
Okay, marketing and sales. The principle is, well, it's stark. 80% of their growth, profitability, and satisfaction comes from 20% of the clients.
The golden 20%.
That's it. And it's not just about knowing who they are. It's about fundamentally changing your approach based on that. Well, three sort of golden rules emerge. First, focus. Provide a truly stunning product or service in that vital 20% of product lines generating 80% of your profits.
Don't dilute the quality.
Right. Second, delight. Devote extraordinary effort to delighting, keeping, and expanding sales to that top 20% of customers, the ones providing 80% of sales or profits.
Go above and beyond for them.
Absolutely. And third, differentiate. Real success is in highly differentiated value for those target customers. Stop trying to be everything to everyone.
Focus, delight, differentiate. Got it. How do you lock in those core customers?
Good question. The sources suggest 4 key steps. First, obviously, rigorously identify who they are. You have to know.
Data.
Second, provide them with outrageous service.
Yeah.
Really go the extra mile.
Wow them.
Third, adopt high output and input methods. Basically, do more of what gives you the highest return for your time and money with them. Efficiency.
Work smarter.
And fourth, don't be afraid to move your successful teams onto struggling areas. Bring that focused expertise where it's needed most.
Transfer the success formula.
Yeah. And for sales forces, practical tip. Treat the top 20% of organizations like national accounts. Give them dedicated focus.
Okay.
And centralize the smaller accounts. Maybe handle them with efficient telephone service.
Segment the service level too.
Exactly. And here's an amazingly successful, amazingly neglected technique mentioned.
Oh, neglected. Tell me.
Just revisiting old customers.
Really? Going back?
Yeah. Bill Bain, founder of Bain & Company, apparently sold Bibles this way, revisited past buyers. Nicholas Barsan, top real estate broker, gets over a third of his massive commissions from repeat clients. Literally knocks on old doors.
Wow. The insight is that the best new business might be hiding in your old address book.
Often is. Nurturing existing relationships.
It's just incredible how versatile this is. It touches everything. The sources list a top 10 business applications, strategy, quality, cost reduction, marketing, selling, IT, decision-taking, inventory, projects, negotiations.
So foundational.
Fundamental lens, really.
Absolutely. And think about decision-taking and analysis. The 80-20 principle here is actually quite liberating.
How so?
It reminds us that, look, most efforts do not realize their intended results. And frankly, most activity is a waste of time.
Ouch. But probably true.
It often feels true, right?
Yeah.
So for important decisions, there's even this 80-21-100 rule.
Okay, break that down.
Gather 80% of the data, do 80% of the analysis, but do it in the first 20% of the time you have.
Get the crucial stuff fast.
Exactly. Then make a decision 100% of the time. Don't waffle, and act as if you're 100% confident it's right.
Commit.
Commit. The insight is that perfect information is a myth, and chasing it wastes time. Get the core data, decide, act.
And if it's wrong?
Change your mind early. The market, the results, they tell you truth much faster than more analysis. But conversely, if something is working,
Double down.
double and redouble your bets. That's what venture capitalists do, right? Most of their bets might fizzle.
Yeah.
But a few massive winners pay for everything else. They focus on amplifying the wins.
Okay, that makes total sense. Now, what's really striking is how this principle, which started with wealth distribution, translates to our personal finances. Let's talk money.
Absolutely. So generally speaking, wealth is created more from investment income than salary, right? Because of compounding.
The magic of compound interest.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Investment returns tend to be even more unbalanced than income returns.
Even more skewed.
Even more. So the source lays out Cook's 10 commandments of investment.
Okay.
And the core insight, viewed through this 80-20 lens, isn't just diversify. It's understanding that the really big gains, they don't come from spreading effort evenly. They come from finding, nurturing, and compounding a few outlier winners. And accepting that, yeah, maybe 80% of your portfolio is just noise.
Focus on the potential home runs.
Kind of. Key takeaways include invest mainly in the stock market. Why? Because long-term it's produced stunningly higher returns than, say, savings accounts or bonds. Also, invest most when the market is low. Now, Pareto himself saw this. The public tends to buy high and sell low. Successful investors often do the opposite. Leverage the imbalance.
Why the fear? Sell the greed.
Something like that. Also, call your loss makers. Cut the dead weight. But crucially, run your games.
Don't sell winners too early.
Exactly. Remember, 80% of the gains in a portfolio usually come from just 20% of the investments. Resist that urge to take small profits and miss the really big ones.
That's a huge mental shift for investing. Okay, but let's bring it even closer to home. What about you, the listener? How can this deep dive actually improve the quality of your own life? This brings us to what the source calls 80-20 thinking, which it describes as, interestingly, hedonistic.
Yeah, hedonistic, believing that life is meant to be enjoyed.
I can get behind that.
Right, and that most achievement is actually a byproduct of interest, joy, and the desire for future happiness.
So achievement follows enjoyment, not the other way around.
That's the idea. It's a profound shift. And the personal insights here are really compelling. Like 80% of achievement and happiness takes place in 20% of our time.
The happy, productive bursts.
Exactly. And crucially, these peaks can be expanded greatly. Also, our lives are profoundly affected, for good and ill, by a few events and a few decisions.
The big turning points.
Right. But often, we take these by default. We just drift into them. The goal is to make those few key choices consciously, intentionally.
Be deliberate about the big stuff.
Yes. The principle advises, focus on what you are hugely more productive at. Don't dilute your precious energy across too many things.
Find your superpower.
Find it and use it. You can be a winner by choosing the right competition, the right team, and the right methods to win. It actually says you are more likely to win by rigging the odds in your favor, legitimately and fairly, than by striving to improve your performance.
Choose your battles wisely.
Pick the right race. And interestingly, most failures come from races for which others enter us.
Wow. Things we felt obligated to do.
Or pushed into. The core message is, stop running races you didn't choose. Identify and amplify the activities that genuinely bring you joy and disproportionate results. Escape the low-value stuff.
That feels like it leads straight into this idea of a time revolution.
Exactly.
You don't just need to manage your time better. That's not enough. You need to fundamentally transform how you spend your time.
It's a deeper change.
And the radical idea here is there is no shortage of time. In fact, we are positively awash with it, which feels counterintuitive sometimes.
Doesn't it? We all feel so busy.
Right. But the source suggests if you actually doubled your time on just the top 20% of your most impactful activities,
Your vital few.
you could potentially work a 2-day week and achieve 60% more than now.
Now that's a radical thought.
It really is. It's daunting, frankly, for someone like me who often feels swamped, but it definitely challenges that whole busyness culture, doesn't it?
Completely.
That idea that action drives out thought, and points out that often the most productive time on a project is that last 20%.
The final push where it all comes together.
Yeah. And the source gives these great examples of eccentric and effective time use. Gladstone, the Victorian statesman, apparently spent his time pretty much as he pleased outside politics, and that fueled his energy and effectiveness. Or this consultant called Randy, who was incredibly laid back but wonderfully effective just by focusing relentlessly on a few priorities.
Less is more. Done right.
It seems so.
Yeah.
The insight is really about strategic allocation of your attention, not just about clocking hours or filling the calendar.
Exactly. And to really escape that tyranny of 80-20, the trap where 80% of your time gets eaten by low-value stuff,
Yeah.
you might actually need radical change. A new job, maybe a new career, different friends, a different lifestyle, maybe even a partner.
Wow, that's serious. Not just tweaking things.
Now, sometimes it requires fundamental realignment, getting your life back in sync with your highest value activities and what truly makes you happy.
Okay. And this applies to relationships too.
Profoundly. 80% of the value of your allies comes from fewer than 20% of their number.
Your key people.
Your key people. The source talks about 5 ingredients for strong relationships: mutual enjoyment, respect, shared experience, reciprocity, and trust. The insight is to be deliberate about filling your relationship slots. Especially professional alliances, aim for maybe 1-2 good mentors, 2-3 real peers you trust, 1-2 mentees you invest in.
You be strategic about your network.
Focus on cultivating those truly high-value connections. Don't spread yourself too thin relationally either. And personally. The source is clear. The most important relationships in your life will powerfully influence both our happiness and our health.
So applying 80-20 to who you spend your time with, that could be huge.
Truly transformative.
And speaking of happiness, the deep dive reminds you, the listener, that you can actually control your happiness to a large degree. It even says optimism is a medically proved ingredient for both success and happiness.
Yeah, optimism matters.
Yeah.
And the source explores these 7 shortcuts to a happy life.
Shortcuts. Okay.
Well, the 80-20 insight sort of embedded in them is that happiness isn't necessarily this complex, elusive thing. It's largely about focusing your effort on a few core areas that yield disproportionate joy.
Like what?
Things like maximizing your control of your own life, setting goals you can actually achieve, being flexible, and crucially, forming close relationships, especially with a happy partner and a few genuinely happy friends.
Surround yourself with happiness.
It helps. The underlying message is really that happiness isn't just something that happens to you. It's something you can actively cultivate by applying this 80-20 lens to your choices, your relationships, directing your energy toward what truly fulfills you.
Okay, powerful stuff for personal life. Now let's zoom out again. Let's expand this deep dive to society itself. What does this all mean for the bigger picture? We hear about the winner-take-all phenomenon, where a few top performers get most of the rewards, and there's this fear sometimes of a 20.88 society where maybe only 20% of people are really needed for the core economy.
Right? That fear is out there. But the source actually reassures us. The doomsters are wrong.
Oh, how so?
It argues that if you properly understand the 80-20 principle, it actually shows it is possible to have progress without revolution.
Okay.
Yes, efficiency gains might lead to some managerial unemployment. That's possible. But society can and will adjust.
How?
Well, one suggestion is shifting people towards the social sector, doing useful things that enrich society in other ways: caring, education, arts.
Things beyond pure economic production.
Exactly. The core insight isn't about suppressing markets or efficiency. It's about ensuring more equal and universal participation in markets by all elements in society, leveraging the gains from efficiency to free up resources for other valuable things.
Okay, so it's about adaptation. And does this principle have practical applications in big societal areas, like education or crime?
Absolutely. In education, the principle suggests 20% of expenditure or resources produces 80% of results.
Find the effective 20%.
Find it and focus on it. Like that example from Flaxmere, New Zealand. Backward 11-year-olds used a specific tape-assisted reading program.
Yeah.
They caught up with their peers in less than 10 weeks.
Wow, quick results from a targeted method.
Massive results from a small, targeted intervention. The insight is huge. The source advocates for schools having more control, more competition, so they can better identify and implement their own vital few effective methods.
Makes sense. What about crime?
For crime reduction, look at New York City in the mid-90s. A stunning reduction in crime.
I remember hearing about that.
Police Commissioner William Bratton explicitly applied the 80-20 principle. He targeted the minority of offenders causing the majority of problems, and specific situations, like drinking on street corners.
The small things that signal disorder.
Exactly. A zero-tolerance approach to those key things. The insight was that cracking down on a few key, visible problem areas had a disproportionately large impact on the overall crime rate.
Highly targeted effort again.
Incredibly effective. But the sources do acknowledge two big buts with social interventions like this.
Okay, what are they?
First, the solutions that work based on 80-20 are often unconventional and pragmatic. They might contradict the usual answers from both the left and the right.
They require thinking outside the usual boxes.
Totally. A non-ideological focus on what actually works. And second, let's be honest, the state's track record as a service provider is often, well, lamentable. Often feels like 80% activity, delivering only 20% of the real value. The implication is that 80-20 points towards a need for some radical rethinking of how public services are delivered.
Okay, that's a lot to think about. So to sort of recap our whole deep dive here, the 80-20 principle, it's not just describing how things are.
No, it's more than that.
It's really prescriptive, isn't it? It doesn't just show you the imbalance. It points the way towards potentially great improvements in the status quo.
Yes.
It's about respecting this really powerful, often counterintuitive force and understanding the leverage it offers.
And just remember, change is necessary for survival. We have to adapt. But constructive change requires insight into what is most effective and a focus on that winning way.
And 80-20 gives us that insight.
It gives us a powerful lens for finding that insight.
So we really invite you listening to think about this. Where can you identify your own vital few and, maybe more importantly, your trivial many? Where in your life or your work, maybe even in your community, where can you apply this understanding to make a truly meaningful difference? Because as the sources conclude, and it's a powerful thought,
It is.
those who ignore the 80-20 principle are doomed to average returns. Those who use it must bear the burden of exceptional achievement.